started like any other day. You grab your coffee, you settle down in your desk, start looking at your usual self, right? Like your Dynatrace, your Splunk dashboards, your Ops Genie alerts, your emails, your WebEx spaces, your team spaces, whatever it is, the usual stuff that we all look at, right? A couple of alerts pop in. Alerts are not new to you, right? You get a lot of false alarms every day. Some of you have rules to ignore those alerts, by the way, right? Nothing new. We all do that every day. A couple more alerts pop in. You start looking into it. You want to understand what's happening here. Endpoints start crashing. Systems start going down. Now you're settling into your seats. Coffee is getting cold. You're sitting it aside, right? Now, you want to really understand what's happening here. Is this a system issue? Is this a regional issue? Call starts pouring in. Your WebEx spaces are busy. Your team spaces are busy. Your leaders are breathing under your neck. What's happening here? How do I bring my systems back up and running? What's the ETA? You know what? Forget about when to bring the systems up. What's the ETA? You have no clue what's the scope of the problem. You're still trying to understand that. There's pressure. An hour has passed. You have no clue what's happening. Some of your systems which are needed to actually do the debugging are down as well. Then what happens? You hear, not from your teams, not from your leaders, but from the internet, from the social media, that the entire globe is down. We've all been through this feeling where you feel better, right? It's not you who caused the outage. Thank God for that, right? We all had that. I had that feeling as well. Once you do that, you start looking at what are the instructions provided in the internet. Let's flip to the other side of the coin. Look at the world. The world wakes up to a stark reality. Doctors cannot look up patient records. Flights are grounded. They cannot take off. Your businesses have come to a screeching halt. There's estimated 5.5 billion of losses with this whole thing happening. Now let's come back to the technology side of the world. You got the instructions. The next 12 to 24 hours were a blur. Now the real problem begins where you start to recover your systems. This scenario is not a thing picked up from Netflix. You all know what I'm talking about. This happened 8 months ago. Either you were on the receiving end of it as a customer, or you were in the middle of the fire trying to put off the fire. So, look, don't want to start on a negative note here with that example. We want to forget that as fast as we can. But look, the point is, in this hyper-connected world, resiliency is not an option, it's a necessity. That single patch has brought down the global operations to its knees. Not for a day, not for weeks, but for months. So I know I skipped through the aspect of that 12 to 24 hours of blur. You know what happened that 12 to 24 hours was really a blur, at least for me. You got the instructions, got it, but then how do you go about fixing it? And some of the companies had hundreds and thousands of servers that were impacted. There's no way to automate that. And forget about applying the patches. Only a handful in the large enterprises had access to even fix the servers, by the way, right? Like they had to go through it, scramble their resources, bring everyone together, and somehow divide and conquer, give super user access to a lot of people, and bring the operations back. You know, the companies that not just survived but thrived through this situation were the ones that were able to recover faster. I think that's what is more important. Now, here is the funny thing, and one of the leaders that I was talking to told me about this. Technology is not a value add these days. It's not nice to have. It's not, hey, it's not what separates you from your customers. I'll give you an example, right? You can have cash to buy groceries, and the big box retail stores may have groceries to sell you, but if their point of sale system is down, they cannot sell you stuff. You may have cash to get a room in a hotel. They may have rooms to give you, but if the system is down, they cannot check you in. So what big companies are right now trying to focus on is business continuity. And it's not an easy thing to do. There's so many wires and tentacles into this business continuity that if your core systems are down, you cannot continue with your business operations. I'll talk more about this in slides to come, but one thing very clearly separated companies was business continuity. I said 12 to 24 hours for Blur, and I'm not, of course, for the good reasons, naming the companies, but there was such a cascading effect on the supply chain that it took some companies months to recover from this. It's not just the technology recovery that's important, the operational recovery is so much more important in this hyper-connected world, right? So, look, this is a famous thing that's floating around in LinkedIn and places for so many things. Look at the architecture diagram that you see here. Unless one of you work for a company that started last week, each one of you are quite familiar with this architecture diagram, right? It's quite familiar. Every one of us have that weak link, or many of those weak links that can bring down the entire operations. Now look at some of the examples. It's a very simple thing. We all use ChatGPT these days. I went to ChatGPT in preparation for this, and I said, you know what, give me a few examples of big outages that happened in the recent past and the reasons for it. You can read through the slides. They look like basic things, right? Look at the first one. The global car manufacturer, 14 productions were called because of a disk space issue. Can you imagine that? Like disk space. Looks like such a basic thing, right? And by the way, look at the last one. One of the big hyperscalers, this is big technology company, by the way, deleted a customer data completely, wiped it out because of an automation rule bug, right? So look at all these examples. Look at the middle one. The big social media network lost access to internet for 6 hours. This is the big, huge one. Billions and dollars of budget that they have in technology. But if you look at these examples, the problem is what you see as the architecture on the right side, that weak link. So resiliency is all about identifying those weak links and how are we prepared to address those things. I'll talk some of what we are doing at ADP in future, but this is why you see that resiliency is all about identifying those weak links and single point of failures, because no matter how technologically advanced you are as a company, you would still have those weak links in your ecosystem. Look, why is resiliency more important now than ever? We have a lot of engineers in the room. They may say, those are big problems. I don't have to worry about it. This is somebody else doing it, right? Like, why does it matter to me as an engineer, right? In the previous slide, you saw examples of those things. These are not edge case scenarios which happen. These are basic outages that are happening. In this day and age, as technology advances, the expectation from engineers are skyrocketed. I come from the era where it was okay to have a major release once every 4 months, once every 6 months. It was okay, by the way, right? I come from the era where you didn't have too many vendor partners or vendor solutions to connect with. You are very self-contained, right? I come from the era where you could actually spend time in documenting your requirements to the depth, right, to the end. But today, the expectation are you push the code the same day. The expectation is you are handling multiple tech stacks. The expectation is you're building cloud-native solutions while you have on-prem and data centers to handle. So it's more important than ever now, but this is one thing I've been saying for 20 years, and for some reason it happens to be true every year. Technology is advancing at a rapid pace. Like, it's true every year. You can say that statement every year. So what it means is, remember the example I just talked about, the big outage 8 months ago? None of the Gen AIs of the world, quantum computings of the world, the hyperscalers of the world could protect us from that, right? It's not their responsibility, of course, but what I'm saying is, as technology advances, so is the need to be more resilient. Okay? All right, so I've been talking about technology resiliency, system resiliency. Here's one thing how we look at it at ADP, and this is one of the nice ways to look at it, is the resiliency is not just about products and systems and architecture. That alone will not help. The example I gave you, the outage, most of the applications and servers were up within a day or two. But what's more important is operational resiliency and talent resiliency. What do I mean by operational resiliency? The plan B is a classic example of it. You can call it business continuity plans, plan Bs, whatever makes sense to you, right? When systems are down, can businesses still continue? Yes, they cannot continue forever, but can you minimize the impact and minimize the blast radius of your outages? That is more important. Large companies, and this is mostly true with large companies, the businesses in the field and services are very disconnected from technology teams, right? Like, go back and look at your business continuity plans for your product that you're responsible for and see what would field do, what would service do if your system is down. Take a look at that, right? Like, you will be surprised to see there's not much there. The plan B would be wait for system to be back up, I guess, right? Like, that's the dependency model today. There's so much dependency in the world. So focusing on operational resiliency is more important. Talent resiliency, I'm sure each one of you in this room is that single point of failure. Unfortunately, that's the weak link that I was talking about in the architecture, right? If you are here today, imagine something happens with your product, hope somebody else can handle it. It's just a hope. I still remember I was here in 2010 or 11. I got a call about something being down, and I had to step out, take that call, work with the team, and then bring back in. So I was the single point of failure back in the day, right? So it's so important for us to look at resiliency as not just technology, but technology, business, which is operations, and talent, right? Like, look at all of them together. Okay, so enough of talking about setting the stage for what is resiliency, why is it important for you all as a developer community, why is it more important now than ever, right? Like, we just talked about that. I want to talk about how to cut this elephant, right? This is big. If you look at the scope of resiliency in general, it's super big. Are you going to talk about it from infrastructure standpoint, from application standpoint, from operations, from talent, from vendors? Like, there's so many aspects to it. So this is the model that we have followed, and we're seeing some good results here with this model, right? Like, we looked at it from three aspects. The first one is, I'll start from resiliency and I'll go the clockwise there. So what we defined as resiliency is we want our systems to be up and running and always available, right? Which is, what do we want to do to make sure we have redundant architecture? What do we have to do to make sure we have auto failovers, auto scalings, circuit breakers, all the fancy, nice things, right? Like, what do we have to do to make sure that happens? The proactive monitors, your AI ops, all that falls into that bucket. So that was one area. That's the biggest, by the way, we want to focus on. We all want our systems to be up and running, but that's not the real world, right? Like, we want to change. We want to keep pushing our changes. When that happens, and when something like an incident I just talked about happens, how do you recover from it? How prepared are you to recover from it? That's the recovery part of the whole thing. And think about all the things ranging from your disaster recovery, which is your applications are completely down, your data centers are completely down. Can you operate from your alternate sites? The plan B scenarios I just talked about, or the incident management itself, right? Like, what kind of playbooks do you have to make sure your systems can be brought up and running? I bet you when the incident that happened, the big one I was referring to, when that happened, people didn't have playbook to handle that. There's a playbook, of course, to bring people on a call and do that. I get that. Everybody has incident management. But how to get over something that impacts the core of your operating system? How do you bring that up? And especially if it happens in hundreds and thousands, people don't have playbooks for that. And I can tell you, and this is unfortunate, it's been 8 months. If something like that happens again, I don't think companies are still prepared for it, right? Like, they're not. And I'll be honest, right? Like, yes, they may be better. Yeah, once you get used to it, you feel like, yeah, I know how to do this, but not prepared in terms of recovery. That's the recovery bucket. Okay, you don't want your systems to be, you want your systems to be up and running. You want to recover fast. The third one is more important. As I said, in this world, there's a lot more expected of engineers, and we push changes into production every day, every week. How do you make sure the changes that go into production withhold the standards of your resiliency and recovery? And this is where the biggest gap is, right? Like, how many of us have strict gates to make sure the changes that go into production live up to the standards of resiliency and recovery? So we broke this into 3 parts. And we have been addressing this in parallel, right? Like nothing is more important, nothing is less important here. You have to look at it in totality across these three areas. Okay, this is my fancy PowerPoint skills, I guess, but I'll tell you why is this journey difficult? We have been at ADP on this journey for about 18 months now, and I'll tell you from my personal experience, this is not an easy journey. I'll walk through these four things. There are more things, of course. The first one is the scope. It's such a broad scope that it's very easy to be lost in the complexity of this. You may still be busy, by the way. You may be busy doing a lot of things, but you're just shooting in the dark, right? Like, are you really moving the needle and making the progress? That's the biggest part of the complexity. You have to be very clear with your scope because it's such a broad topic and you could invest on and on into it and achieve nothing. I'll give you my own example in my company. We are responsible for payroll. I think paying 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 individuals at ADP, in US at ADP. And for us, it's very important to make sure you get your paycheck. Super important, right? We cannot say, you know what, paycheck is canceled this week. We cannot say that, of course, right? So how do we make sure that we focus our scope on the core ones? I was talking to a leader at airlines, and he said such a wonderful thing recently. He said, you know what, Ram, we look at our tier 1 applications as something that is required to fly the flight. That's the most important thing to them. That's tier 1 to them. Things such as, I know they have applications to make sure the flight is well balanced in terms of weight, so on and so forth. Those applications are tier 1 to them, just like payroll is probably tier 1 to us. So prioritizing and focusing on that is the difficult part because everybody has different views of priority. Everybody thinks their product is most important, right? Like, how do you go about that? The second one is my favorite. Unfortunately, and this is little unfortunate, that for resiliency, the definition of success is absence of failure. You could do 100 things behind the scenes, but you have 2 major outages in production. That's it. People lose their confidence. You have to start all over from the start, right? So then the teams that are actively working on this, how do you give them the confidence that they're actually making progress working on that extensive and broad scope? I'll give you some things of what we're doing in that space, but that's the second complexity of this journey. The third one is, of course, execution complexities, right? You define the scope, you know how to measure it, hopefully, but then the real execution comes in, the prioritization comes in. How do you explain the ROI of resiliency to leaders? How do you get approval for these things? How do you get, if there are SREs or DevOps in the room, they'll probably understand this. When we roll out new features, there's a lot of kudos and claps and celebrations in the room, so developers probably get all the attention and the limelight. But then people who are working hard behind the scenes, they are in the limelight when things go wrong, right? So how do you make sure that the complexities and motivating the team, they go together is, how do you make sure there is right prioritization and ROI for your investment, right recognition for the need for it? I'm sure if somebody was told that, hey, something like the incident I just talked about may happen 1 year from now, can you please invest a couple of $1 million into it? That ask will be declined. That will not be approved in your budget cycles, right? But then how do you still keep working towards it? And there's an interesting stat. I learned that, every outage that every company has, I think they lose $1 to $2 million every hour because of an outage, right? So going by that, $2 million would have been nothing for that investment, for that incident, but people still don't invest into it. Motivating the team. Look, I've never come across leaders getting pat on the back for addressing their alerts on time or having a redundant architecture. It's expected as part of job. So how do you still motivate your teams, your peers, and yourself, more importantly, to keep doing the right things? That's the complex part. It's not a new feature. It's not Gen AI. Everybody wants to have their hand on it these days, right? Like, it's not that. But how do you keep motivating people to do this? I will leave you with 3 things that we are doing at ADP, and we are finding good results with it, right? Like, if any of you are interested, I know we have our ADP friends here in red today. They can talk about it, and I can talk about it as well and share more. The first thing that we are doing is we are attacking this in layers. What do I mean by layers? I'll give you one example of layers, right? Every one of you have data centers or regions if you're on cloud, and hope you have the secondary data center or your secondary region as well. Ask yourself this question, right? And if you're banks, hopefully you do this, but ask yourself this question: how often do you have your applications operating live from your secondary site? How prepared are you if your entire data center goes dark right away? How much capacity do you have on the other side to fail over all your applications? Do you have a playbook to know which applications go first versus others? Across all layers, across network, across storage, right? Across middleware. Do you know all of that, right? So we are focusing this in layers. So layer one for us is, okay, we'll pick the top applications, like the airline example I gave you or the payroll example. We'll pick the top core strategic applications, make sure they're ready and can operate and take live traffic from the DR side. Once that is done, then we'll focus on the ecosystem of applications, which is no applications exist on its own these days, so it's ecosystem always. Make sure that ecosystem can fail over and operate on its own. That's good, that's done. Now expand the scope beyond that to include an entire data center failover. Got it, that exists. And then the plan B scenarios that we're talking about, right? So if you start layering things, that's the best way to go. Because otherwise, remember, we're all smart people, we're all technologists. There'll always be that smart person in the room saying that, why don't you think about this scenario, complex thing? Oh, you're focusing on this basic thing, I get it, but what about this? Right? To prove a point, I guess, in a room. They'll say that, they'll bring it up, right? So you need to be very, very clear on what your layer is. Have a clear definition of done for that layer. Again, don't complicate this, don't go outside the scope. Have a very clear definition, get that done, and communicate that to your enterprise. To your teams, if you're doing it at the team level. Have clear definition. The layered approach is what we are focusing on, and this approach is true at all layers, whether it is disaster recovery or monitoring. Take monitoring as an example. We say, okay, the first step is reduce the noise for your applications, noise ratio, right? The second step is, okay, make sure that the MTTR and MTTD for those alerts come down, and then put AI ops on top of it to make sure you're looking at the patterns and how to avoid it in future. So no, I can go on and on with the examples. This is one thing that we are focusing on to avoid the complexity number one I talked about, which is complex systems, right? The complex scope, layered approach. The second one, as I said, my favorite. Unfortunately, the definition of success is absence of failure, but that cannot be the definition of success for resiliency. Teams don't attach it with that. So what do we have to do is to measure. You cannot improve what you cannot measure. And resiliency is a difficult thing to measure. It's very, very difficult to measure. And nobody wants to be compared with the next team or the team next to them or the company next to them or the product next to them. What we have done, and this is a lot of partner teams helped us with this, and some great vendors in the market helped us with this. We started defining the maturity curve. Here's the purpose of maturity curve. We said level 5 of maturity is the North Star. That's the ideal state. That's the nirvana. We want everybody to be there, level 5. And we said, you do a self-assessment of where you stand on that maturity curve. We'll tell you what 0 looks like, what 1 looks like, so on and so forth. You do an assessment of where you stay on that, and we'll help you go up the maturity curve. We'll tell you what you need to go up there. The advantage with this is some of the products may come back and say, I don't have to be 5 in this area. I don't want to be 5 in this area. That's a lot of investment. You know what? I want to get to 4. Great. We'll help you get to 4. Let's align on that. Let's put a roadmap to get us there, right? The biggest advantage with this is when people start looking at a maturity curve, suddenly it doesn't become a vague problem. I want you to fix your monitoring and alerting. Oh, you got an outage last week and you didn't have a clue about it. Go fix your monitoring. Means nothing. Yes, I'll fix it for that issue, but what about my entire product, right? Like that's where you want people to go back and say, let me look at the maturity curve. Where do I stand in this aspect of monitoring and observability? And what actions do I have to take to go up the maturity curve, right? There are so many examples of this. We are doing this with chaos engineering maturity curve, monitoring and observability maturity curve, release management maturity curve, change management maturity curve. We're doing so many of those things, and people immediately latch on, and these days they start talking to me in numbers. We are at DR2, we are at DR3, and I myself have to go back and say, what is 2, what is 3, right? Like people are so latching on to this. It's easy for them to explain that I'm at a maturity DR of 2, which means that I have a DR side, I do the functional test on an annual basis, but I never operate it from the DR side. Got it, it's a 2, right? 5 is what the ideal state is, which is either you're active-active, or if you're not active-active, you're operating every 4 months from the alternate sites, right? That's what the expectation is from some financial banks. So this is one thing that is doing wonders. I could not, of course, pay some examples of what we do at ADP here for obvious reasons, but this is working great for us. This is what is needed to bring developers and individuals into the big program. They like to measure things, they like to see the progress, they like to celebrate the progress. I want to leave you with this last tip, right? Mike Tyson once famously said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? We all know that. You talk to architects in the organization, you talk to technologists in the organization, they will passionately talk about how great their design is. Oh, we have auto-scaling. Or we have auto-scaling because we are on cloud, right? Oh, we do well with failovers. So look at how great our architecture is. They can go on and talk about it. But you know what? Nothing beats the real test. You know what I said? Resiliency is not just about technology, it's operations and talent. The best way to test all those 3 things is to actually pull the plug and say, now let's see what happens. Don't pull it in production, of course, right? Like we're not ready. You got to go up the maturity curve before you reach there, but nothing beats live fire drills. And again, there is maturity curve to live fire drills. You want to start with chaos engineering. Start in the lower environment with your live fire drills. And then, you know what? You may want to set up red teams or whatever color you want to give them. The team which is responsible for actually pulling the plug, and they don't even tell you it's a real problem or a made-up problem. They'll just pull the plug, they'll follow the process, and make sure that you actually respond and address on time. This is a very good experience that we are trying to do right now at ADP, and you will be surprised to see in my fancy architecture diagram I had only one single point of failures. You'll be surprised to see how many exist in your ecosystem. I'll give you one example, recent thing that we have experienced. There was redundancy in place that we had, but you know what? The failover did not work. And it took us a lot of time to figure out what that was. Of course, there was no end user impact with this, thank God. But then just because there is redundancy by design on paper does not mean it works. You have to fail over and test it and make sure it works. Okay, I was told that the goal of Keynote is to set the tone for the rest of the day. And hopefully you can take it with you, with your careers and your lives as well. Here's what I'll tell you. Resiliency is not optional. It's a necessity, as I said. The next time a crisis happens, which is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, I want to make sure you all not just survive, but thrive. My name is Machiraju. I work for ADP, a wonderful company. Thank you all for having me today. Have a great day. Yeah.